First off, thank you very much for spending some time with WisconsinEye. Let's just begin by having you introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, who you represent, and why you're here today.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Scott Walker. I'm the Milwaukee County Executive, which is an elected position. To point that out, because not every county, including Rock County in the state, has that. Out of 72 counties, there's only 11 of us that have elected county executives. But for me, it's kind of nice to be here because I grew up just down the way in Walworth County. Spent a lot of time coming through here when I lived in Delavan because I had some relatives who lived in Rockford, Illinois, and so we'd often come down this way, down 43, which back then was 15. It wasn't Interstate 43 at the time. And I have a lot of friends in the area. I know Paul Ryan for years and a lot of other folks here. And obviously one of the things on my mind is the elections in 2008, but another thing in my mind is considering whether or not I should make a bid for changing the leadership in the state government in 2010.
Well, tell us a little bit about what your role is here today or in this election process for 2008.
Yeah, the biggest thing I've been doing is the last few months throughout the summer and probably again into the fall, I've been going around the state not only at party events like this, but in many cases helping legislative candidates, both incumbents and challengers in the state assembly and state senate. Basically, many times just appearing at events for them, getting the crowd jazzed up, getting people motivated. And people ask, why are you doing that? Is it looking ahead? Well, certainly that's part of it. But for me, the reality is if I look 2 years from now and think this state can do better if we have better leadership, particularly at the governor's level, I don't want to just change the name, down the way here at the state line as to who the governor is. I want to make sure we've got a team in place that can really put Wisconsin back to work, that can get taxes under control, get the entrepreneurial spirit together, and really start to make state government work again. Right now, we've got a failed system. We have one of the largest gap deficits in the country. We have a bond rating that in the tenure of this current governor went down. We've got some of the lowest job growth in the Midwest, other than states like Michigan, which understandably with GM and Ford and others is the highest unemployment, but we've got some of the most stagnant job growth here. Certainly up the way, the problems at General Motors in Janesville and how it affects all of Rock County. I just don't see a government, particularly led by a governor in the state, that's looking to try and put people back to work and to think ahead and replace those jobs. You can't always prevent everything from happening, but I know years ago in my area when we lost 500 jobs from Tower Automotive, we were already looking at the same time, working with the city of Wauwatosa, working with my county government to bring GE Healthcare in and to put 3 of their international business units right in our research park. That created 2,000 high-paying jobs that more than replaced the 500 we lost from Tower. So you got to think ahead. It can't just be reaction. A lot of it's got to be proactive into what we can do to put the state back to work. And I think with the right team, whether it's from down here at South Central Wisconsin or all around the state, I think there's enough people willing to stand up and make a difference.
Well, regarding a possible run for the state's executive position, what are you hearing as far as your exploration into that?
Well, I think people are ready for a change. I mean, it's one of those. I think part of the thing that's the most frustrating is a combination. You look at the economy, you look at the economy here in Wisconsin, across the country. Certainly all of us are facing a challenge, but we could be doing more. We could be more aggressive. We could be making ourselves more attractive to employers that could bring in more jobs from other parts of the state or other parts of the country and other parts of the globe. But the other part I hear a lot of is just the frustration of this guy isn't doing what he promised. Years ago, before he ran for re-election, this current governor gave a State of the State address that could have been a page right out of the speeches I give typically. In my case, this will be in September, my 7th straight budget without a property tax levy. I've said repeatedly the reason I do that is because I want residents and employers to be able to afford to stay here. The same thing's true for the state. This governor gave a speech there that talked about how he wasn't going to raise taxes, how it would hurt the economy, how it would drive jobs out, and yet this last budget, he presented a budget to the legislature that raised taxes some $3 billion. I don't know how you reconcile that with what he did there, with what he said before he was up for re-election. And I come from a county that's overwhelmingly Democrat, and yet I got nearly 60% of the vote this last time. Because I think whether you're Republican or Democrat, what people want the most is straight talk. They want people who are going to tell you what they're going to do, have a plan, not just some idea, but have a plan, and then go out and execute it. And to the elected officials who do that, again, Democrat or Republican, I think the voters are willing to reward them if they get the job done. The ones they're fed up with are the ones who promise things and then go out and make excuses for why they can't get it done.
Could you maybe spend a little time describing Wisconsin demographics as far as they sort of work out politically? Particularly, with the presidential campaign really getting into gear here, do you think that'll affect local politics as far as who gets elected and who doesn't get elected on a state level?
Well, Wisconsin, without a doubt. The Midwest, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin are probably three of the top 5 key states in the country in terms of swing states. The last 2 elections, we've gone Democrat here, but last election it was by the smallest margin of any state that went for carry anywhere in the country. And so we're very much of a swing state, and that's part of our history. You think back a decade ago, Tommy Thompson and Russ Feingold, both up in 1998. Tommy Thompson was elected to a record 4th term. Russ Feingold was reelected by a slim margin, but reelected nonetheless. Ideologically, that doesn't make any sense when you match Tommy being conservative, Feingold being liberal, and yet people like Mavericks. They like people who stand up and say what they're going to do and then go out and do it. They like people who have a plan and shake things up. And so we're very independent. I think it's not only a Wisconsin, but a Midwestern trait. You see that in Iowa. You see that in Minnesota. There's, I think, a certain independence that we like to vote for the person, not necessarily the party. And so I think that's exactly why, and nearly every poll, even though some are closer than others, you see that despite what appears to be a larger national margin amongst the overall population for Senator Obama, that here Senator McCain certainly has got a shot, just as it was very close to the last 2 elections. Where that has an impact, interesting enough, is a lot of people were fearful that high voter turnout by Obama might have an impact on conservatives and Republicans in state assembly and state Senate races on the local level. But conversely, the interesting thing is John McCain at the top of the ticket for Republicans has actually helped kind of keep in check a lot of those independents and at least keep them willing to look at Republican candidates. So I still think it's very much a toss-up.
Speaking of Senator McCain, did you have a favorite in the run-up for the GOP nomination? And what do you think of Senator McCain's presumptive nomination and candidacy?
In my case, I didn't. I was up on the ballot this last spring where I got 60%. I decided being on the ballot at the same time they all were. I knew a lot of the candidates and admired them. I've admired John McCain since I went from Delavan down the way here to Badger Boys Nation years ago. Met him when he was just a young congressman starting out at that time. So I've had a great admiration for not only his record but his personal story. But any of the candidates had their strengths and minuses. I think in this case, Paul Ryan, who's here with me, Paul and I grew up in this area. We were inspired to go into not to politics as much as public service by a guy by the name of Ronald Reagan. And what I loved about Reagan was you knew what he stood for, you knew where he was going, and you knew how he was going to get there. And in his case, it was strong national defense, limited government, lower tax. As much as conservatives might have an issue here or there with John McCain, the reality is on those 3 big issues that pulled many of us to Reagan, strong national defense, he was ahead of the curve. He was the only politician in Washington who was right on the surge. He certainly knows national defense because of his personal story. When it comes to limited government, my goodness, here's a guy who's not a Johnny-come-lately when it comes to earmarks. He has never, in all of his years in the House or the Senate, ever once offered an earmark. So he knows exactly what it takes, and you can believe him when he says he's going to do earmark reform and cut government waste. And when it comes to taxes, he's the clear candidate of choice when it comes to maintaining the taxes that were passed in 01 and 03 and looking ahead to even more tax cuts to fuel the economy in the future. So I think it's very positive. I think conservatives feel good about him, but I also think independents looking for someone of character are going to find John McCain appealing.
One of the questions we're asking candidates these days is why they consider themselves either a Republican or Democrat. In your case, why do you consider yourself a Republican?
Yeah, I consider myself probably a conservative first, then a Republican, but I think there's a clear difference between a conservative, a liberal, Republican, or Democrat. The simple difference is Democrats believe in the government to solve their problems. Republicans believe in the people. I choose freedom over government-driven opportunities, and to me, that's where it puts the power in the hand of the people. Thank you. Well, the nice thing, Tim, is I can say you actually were my state senator for a brief period of time before I moved up to Wauwatosa in my area, and I wish you were still the state senator down here as well. But that's a whole nother discussion. It's great to be out there. I had to make sure I went to my wardrobe and pulled out my khaki pants so that Ryan was wearing the shorts and I was wearing the pants, because the other day somebody said in the middle of our briefing with Mike Duncan, the RNC chairman, a guy from Green Bay, looked over and he said, "It's great to have Congressman Ryan here listening the whole time." And the rest of the crowd kind of looked looked at the guy, and I said, no, as my wife would say, Paul's much better looking than I am. So I had to separate between the two of us. But it is good to be back here in Rock County. I was thinking, I think Memorial's somewhere over here a little bit. I have a great memory here because at Beloit Memorial, that's the track that I ran that qualified me for the state track meet, like, a million years ago when we went up there from Delavan, Darien. So it's kind of fun to be back here. For me, I was just on a second ago, and they were doing an interview, and the last question was, well, why you're a Republican versus a Democrat? And for me, it's real easy. It's the same answer I give in a larger sense, why I'm a conservative and not a liberal. And it's because liberals believe in government, I believe in people. It's real simple that way. It's either you have opportunity or you have entitlement. It's ultimately about freedom or the lack thereof and handing it off to somebody else. And I think that, there's a couple great examples. Paul just talked about oil and relieving our dependency on foreign oil. Great example that really affects Rock County in a big way that was just brought out about a week or so ago. The Governor Doyle's task force on so-called global warming put out a report. It's mind-boggling. I call it a green print, not because it's about the environment, because it's about how much green is it going to cost all of us. But one good example that directly affects Rock County, and it's why the comptroller of General Motors in Janesville was one of the 3 votes against this. And it was because one of the many provisions in there was to raise the emission standards in the state of Wisconsin to the same level they are the highest in the country out in California. Well, can you imagine for 1 second how that's going to encourage GM or Ford or Chrysler or anybody else to bring more jobs back in or eventually recoup here in the state of Wisconsin if we've got an emission standard that's higher than the national average, that's higher than anything reasonable, but instead is out there with some of the, the real wackos out in California who are pushing off the deep end. Instead, nowhere in that document did they talk about drilling for oil. Nowhere in that document did they lay out a legitimate roadmap of how we go to a safe way to turn towards more use of nuclear energy and other alternatives out there. And instead, they talked about all these things that are going to cost us more and more and more and more money. I think that's one of the fundamental differences, both not just with the governor, but with our legislative candidates, our congressional candidates, and others. It's about who do you put your belief in? Do you believe that government should do things? Do you believe in greater entitlement, or do you believe the people and the public and the free market enterprise system should make the difference? I, for one, want to stand with freedom every chance I get, and that's why I'm down here today. I just want to reiterate 3 quick things that Paul talked about. First and foremost, state assembly, we got to lay the law down, because if we don't win the state assembly come this fall, there's not 1, there's not 2, there's not 3 reasons. There's 15.2 billion reasons why we're in trouble, and that's the cost of the health care plan that Judy Robson and the others in the state Senate pushed through. That would be the largest tax increase, not only in the history of the state, the largest tax increase in the history of the world. We'd rank from not only to number 11, which we finally dropped to, we'd go all the way up to number 1, the most overtaxed state in the country. I don't want to be on that number 1 list. I don't think you want to either. So we got to help Mike before he takes off, and we got to help him even more after he leaves. We got to help. I did an event up in Whitewater for Debbie Towns. We really got to help her out. I mean, 32 votes, that was the difference. I think we know how real it is. I think every one of her Christmas card list people that didn't vote for her know that they've got to be out again. But Debbie Towns, right here in your backyard, Debbie Towns may legitimately be the seat that determines control of the Wisconsin State Assembly and the fate of all of us as taxpayers in the state of Wisconsin. So I'm going to be down many times more for Debbie as well. On the Senate side, I'd like to think optimistically we get a little upset in Kenosha down the way and up in Green Bay. We might have a chance of taking it over this term, but if not, I think we're just 1 seat away. We're going to protect all 4 of our current seats right now. Tom Tiffany, I've done 2 events for him up in Rhinelander in that part of the state. There's no doubt in my mind Tom Tiffany's going to win that seat. We'll be 1 away, and 2 years from now we recruit Leah Vukmir to run in my area. We'll get the state Senate back. And then third, we got to make sure we get John McCain elected as President of the United States. He was seen, I was with him the other day. He was on fire. Paul and I have been concerned about this. Clearly, he ate his Wheaties that morning because he was on point. He talked about oil. He talked about taxes. He talked about government waste. He talked about corruption and being a true maverick, not just somebody who talks about it. This is a guy who's on point, on message. I think conservatives, we could be proud of him. A guy who's never asked for an earmark in his life, who feels passionately about taxes and national defense. We can be proud to go out and work hard for him. If we do all those things, I'm confident we can be proud not just to live in the United States, but proud to live here in the state of Wisconsin. And that's why I'm down here today and thrilled that you're all joining us as well. Godspeed.